You're listening to an Ono Media podcast.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me for Rise in Crime, your morning caffeine hit all about crime. I'm Mama Jules, and this might be the day of the year you really need a Rise in Crime episode. I recorded before the big game yesterday, so I can't congratulate fans from either team, but I do know some of you may have stayed up late and possibly had a little too much to eat or drink at a Super Bowl party. So hopefully together we can get moving this morning and start the day listening to some true crime. And today we're starting off a little bit heavy and a little bit complicated because a 17-year-old has been acquitted for killing his mother, and the death of his mother happened just 18 months after he admitted to killing his father. Two potential murders, two different states, and 17-year-old Colin Griffith is walking free today. So let's go chronologically here. What happened between Colin and his father Charles in Oklahoma in February of 2023? Okay, Colin's parents, 41-year-old Charles and 39-year-old Catherine, were engaged in a bitter divorce battle. This was following 20 years of marriage. The battle found Catherine claiming that Charles had abused her for decades. Colin was the younger of the couple's two kids. He has an older brother named Christopher. And so when the marriage ended in 2020, Christopher was old enough to be out on his own. Are you guys kind of doing the math here? The marriage was 20 years, and Catherine in 2024 is 39 years old. Yet she has an adult son and a 17-year-old son. Catherine was pregnant as a 13-year-old, and she gave birth as a 14-year-old. And the fighting has been going on for 20 years. Well, custody of Colin had become a central part of the bitter divorce. Charles eventually was awarded sole custody of Colin, and Catherine was claiming that sole custody to Charles meant she was never allowed to see Colin. In fact, in 2022, she said she hadn't seen her son for 2.5 years. Catherine also claimed in that time that Colin had called her, begging her to come to Oklahoma and remove him from his father's home. And in some filed court documents, Catherine had made other claims about Charles' parenting style. She said he wouldn't let Colin leave the home because Colin was gay, and his father did not want him interacting with people. She also claimed that Charles would frequently harass her, and that harassment had caused her chronic PTSD. Now, Catherine had a specific request in the court documents. She wanted Charles to take Colin to therapy because she was worried he was suffering emotional irreparable harm. This because Charles emotionally abused Colin. Now, there are always two sides in a court case, and Charles responded in court documents with claims that Colin did not want to see his mother. Charles claimed Catherine was, quote, emotionally and mentally unstable, and that she was currently abusing drugs and alcohol. Charles said he purposely had stopped letting Colin communicate with Catherine, this after one particularly damaging moment. Charles said Catherine had texted the teen a picture of her handwritten suicide note, and that happened in May of 2020. He said the communication between Catherine and Colin, mother and son, well, it only happened when Catherine would make contact during one of her manic episodes. Charles also claimed that Catherine had posed as an adult male on Discord, and during those Discord conversations, Catherine, who like I said was the anonymous male, encouraged Colin to run away from home. Okay, can we just agree on one thing here? This is a crappy situation for a 15-year-old. So divorce and custody agreement happens in 2020. Colin is with his father 100% of the time, and his father and mother are fighting about him. There are claims out there that Colin's life was like a prisoner's life in Oklahoma. I can't really verify that one way or the other because this whole thing is full of he said, she said. But the entire custody thing was settled on February 14th of 2023. On that night, Colin called 911. He told the police that he had been cornered by his father, who was holding a knife, this all following an argument the two were having. He said while he was being cornered with his dad holding a knife, he grabbed a gun and shot his father twice, once in the head and once in the chest. Police did arrest Colin for murder, noting that the claims of self-defense did not match what the crime scene was indicating. Catherine came and posted the $50,000 bond, and she was awarded sole custody of Colin. And that just kind of makes sense, right? Charles has been shot and killed, so she's the lone parent alive. But the authorities in Oklahoma, they couldn't make the charges stick, and eventually all of the charges were dropped. And off Catherine and Colin went to Florida. Well, just 7 months after Colin went to live with his mother in Port Charlotte, Florida, police were called to the home after a heated argument turned violent. When officers arrived, they placed Colin in the back of a patrol car. And this is just kind of how they do it. They're going to separate the two arguing parties and put Colin in the back of the car. That was their choice at this time. And while he was in the back of the patrol car, Colin was recorded on police body cam footage talking to his grandmother, who also lives in Florida. In that footage, he told his grandmother that he kept telling his mother during their argument that he wasn't a psychopath and that he wasn't a murderer. He said all he wanted to do was live peacefully. He then told his grandmother that his mother kept yelling at him to shut up, shut up, shut up. He then claimed that his mother hit him. His grandmother did kind of, push back on his claims in the police body cam footage, and she told him that he really wasn't trying to peacefully coexist. I'm going to guess she said this because Colin hit back. I mean, he was a little violent too. Well, also on the video from that domestic dispute, the grandmother can be heard saying that Colin does not want to go back to his mother's home and that he would have preferred to be placed in foster care. Now, police felt that the two needed separated, and so Colin was taken to jail for the evening. And after one day in jail, Colin was released and sent back to Catherine's home. But that was short-lived. In Florida, a law exists called the Baker Act. That law allows certain professionals, like a doctor or a mental health practitioner or maybe even law enforcement, they can Baker Act someone, meaning they can place that person on a hold so that they won't hurt themselves or others. Well, Colin was Baker Acted just hours after being released from the jail because staff at the jail reported that Colin had said he wanted to kill his mother. Now, body cam footage from the Baker acting shows law enforcement explaining to Catherine that they couldn't just sit by and allow a kid who had said that he wanted to kill his mom to go right back to that home where his mother lives. The officer told Catherine that he wasn't going to ignore it and fell Catherine and fell Colin. Now, when deputies confronted Colin about his alleged threats, he told officers he was in a constant fight or flight state. He then said this, and I'm going to read it to you verbatim. He said, "If I think she's going to do something, even if she's not, I might act. I'm not going to, go crazy or anything, but I'm not sure, honestly." Well, that statement sounds a little ominous, and you'll understand why as we carry forward with the story. The deputy, at that time, then asked Colin if he was sure he wasn't going to hurt his mom. He responded by saying, "Only if she hurts me." Eventually, after a few hours, Colin was released to his mother, and they went about their tumultuous lives. At least their tumultuous lives privately. Catherine, who was super active on social media, was presenting their lives like, all is well. We're so cute together, mother and son, vacationing. We're taking selfies. But the trauma at home was clearly not settled. And in September of 2024, Colin and Catherine had another massive blow-up. Colin left. He fled in his car to his grandmother's home closer to Central Florida. And on September 8th, Catherine went to her mother's home with the intention of picking up Colin and bringing him back to her home. It didn't play out that way. Instead, witnesses said they saw Colin and Catherine arguing and that he drug her by her hair into the home. Now, once inside the grandmother's home, the dispute continued to play out, and Catherine ended up with a knife wound that had a point of entry at the back of her neck and was thrust so violently that the knife created an exit wound in the front of her neck. Now, I have the audio of the 911 call from that day that was made by Colin, but it's very hard to hear, so I'm not going to play it for you, but I'll let you know what it says. When the dispatcher answers, Colin says his mother is bleeding out. In fact, he says that phrase, bleeding out, more than once. He then says she fell on a knife and is dying. When deputies arrived on scene, Colin was standing outside of the mobile home in Auburndale. He said he and his mother were in an extended fight. He claimed Catherine had lunged at him with a knife, missed, and then she fell on the knife, and that's how the wound was caused. He then asked deputies if he could have a lawyer. Now, Colin was arrested that day, September 8th, and on September 19th, just 8 days later, he was indicted by a grand jury on capital felony charges of first-degree murder and kidnapping. The 17-year-old was charged as an adult. Last week, the trial for Colin was held, just 4 months after his mother's death. And before I share key points from the 4 days of testimony, I need to let you in on something. The death of Charles was never discussed at trial. It couldn't be. The judge ruled that any information about Charles' death was inadmissible, specifically information where the police seemed to believe that Colin was guilty of that potential murder, but he couldn't be charged at this time. So the jury never heard about Colin shooting his father. Like I said, potentially in self-defense, and by others, allegedly in an act of murder. Well, when it got underway, Assistant State Attorney Mark Levine told the jury that Colin was a murderer and that, quote, Operation Kill Mom had been accomplished. That the attack on that September evening stemmed from an argument about the day before, where Catherine had asked Colin to hang up a shelf and then go outside and pull some weeds. That request didn't land well, and Colin fled to his grandmother's. When Catherine arrived to pick him up, the argument continued outside the mobile home, and he said that Catherine could be heard yelling, "Stop, stop, you're hurting me," before Colin drug Catherine into the residence. About an hour and 15 minutes later, Colin made the 911 call. But defense attorney and public defender Amy Thornhill said that's not how it happened. First, she tackled the kidnapping charge, saying it was Catherine who was the aggressor. That witnesses saw her arrive at the mobile home, slam her car door, and march towards her son. She also said that even though the two were arguing, that Catherine had gone inside the home on her own volition. She said that Colin didn't drag his mother inside. Instead, he hurried her inside because he was just embarrassed that she was making a scene. She also said that no wounds were shown on Catherine, indicating she had been drugged by her hair. Things like, there were no scalp issues and there was no missing hair. She also said Catherine was the aggressor always, that she had pulled a gun on her son before, and that the system had actually failed Colin. She indicated that he had reported his mother and that he didn't want to live with her, yet he just kept being returned to her custody. Now let me take you through some of the testimony from the trial. When the medical examiner took the stand, he described Catherine's neck wound as gaping and that the knife had torn through her esophagus, through her windpipe, and through a vocal cord before exiting the front of her neck. He said he could not classify the knife wound as accidental because there would be no way that Catherine could have fallen on the knife and had the knife enter at the back of her neck. Well, Colin's grandfather, that's Catherine's dad, testified that Colin referred to Catherine and his grandmother as those two bitches that he wants to see bleed out. Then one of the detectives took the stand and shared text messages between Colin and Catherine. In those messages, Catherine accuses Colin of calling her an evil bitch. She writes in text, wishing him good luck at hiring a lawyer if she chooses to share with authorities his plan to murder her. In the text, she threatens to shut off his phone, to cancel his car insurance, to sell his car, and to pull him out of school. The detective also shared ring camera footage from the day of Catherine's death, where she tells Colin to get in his car and follow her home or she will call the cops on him. Now, when the defense had their turn to call witnesses, they immediately called Grandma. She was there to testify about Catherine's parenting style. She told jurors that Catherine would just dump Colin off and kind of forget about him for weeks. She said Catherine was suicidal often and that she had allegedly attempted to take her own life multiple times. She then told jurors that Catherine was violent and that she knew that Colin had been beat with a belt, that he'd been hit on the head before, that he'd been made to do push-ups until he was physically exhausted, and that at one point, Catherine had handed Colin a gun and demanded that he pull the trigger and kill her. Grandma said she wasn't afraid of Colin and that they talk regularly from jail, where she helps him with his food choices and then she asks him to read the Bible. And that's the only witness the defense called, just Colin's grandma. When the defense gave their closing arguments, Attorney Thornhill said that Colin's grandfather wasn't really a reliable witness, that he hadn't helped with the investigation until weeks after Colin was arrested, and that the two, they didn't have a close relationship, that they would go weeks without talking. She also floated an interesting theory about the death. She suggested that Catherine may have intentionally provoked the whole thing. She said the following: "Isn't it reasonable that Kathy knew what the outcome was going to be, and she picked up a knife and threatened Colin with it? You've heard of suicide by cop? Isn't it reasonable to think that Kathy committed suicide by son?" Well, the state said it was clear that Colin, through his history, had shown a motive for killing his mother, and that wound to her neck was inflicted by Colin. Well, the jury took just one day to deliberate, and in what many are calling a very controversial decision, the jury found Colin Griffith not guilty of murder and kidnapping. Following the announcement, most of the parties involved just kind of went radio silent. The public defender, attorney Amy Thornhill, well, she said she was thankful for the jury's thoughtful consideration of the case, and then that was it. She didn't do a victory lap. And the family members, well, they also didn't speak to the media. Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd released this statement following the verdict. Here's how it reads: "Our detectives firmly believe that Colin Griffith murdered his mother. The jury determined that they could not convict him beyond and the exclusion of all reasonable doubt. During our investigation, detectives found witnesses that believe he also murdered his father in Oklahoma. That investigation is ongoing." Well, Colin can never be retried for the death of his mother. He can be tried for the death of his father. In her last post on Instagram, just one day before her death, Catherine shared a picture of a footbridge in Florida. She captioned the photo writing, "That old familiar body ache, the snaps from the same little breaks in your soul. You know when it's time to go. Sometimes giving up is the strong thing." Now those are lyrics from a Taylor Swift song. It's one last eerie post to a string of potentially mischaracterized happy posts by Catherine. Let me know what you think of this case. I've seen lots of people saying that the jury got it wrong here. Now, I promised that I would be watching the case of Ronald Dumas Jr. Now, we shared his missing persons story back on the January 20th episode of Rise in Crime. And when I brought you the story back then, it had already been a month since Ronald had been declared missing by his family and law enforcement. And at that time, the family was working to get the word out. That's how I learned about the story. They had, on their own accord, released photos they had obtained from a Huntsville, Alabama liquor store showing the 37-year-old realtor walking through the store with his phone in his hand. In those pictures, he was wearing a black and red flannel and grayish jeans. He also seems not distressed. He entered the store with two women and left the store with the same two women. He's just kind of looking like he's doing a little shopping. Now, the family was concerned about the investigation because the police were being a little closed-mouthed, and there might have been a reason they were. But the family wasn't getting much information from the police. And the clothes that Ronald was wearing in the liquor store photos, Well, those didn't match up with the description that police were giving to everyone. In the police's description on the missing persons information page, Ronald is said to have been wearing a green pea coat. Now, the images from the liquor store, they were recorded on December 15th. On December 16th, Ronald's car was found abandoned in Tennessee, but they didn't know that it was abandoned because he was a missing persons. It was just found there. Now, when the car was reported, it was obviously impounded. Also on the 16th, Ronald's phone data has him near Jackson, Tennessee. His family reported him missing the next day, on the 17th. And this phone data that was supplied by the FBI says that the phones Ronald had with him were now powered off. He probably has two phones due to his line of work, probably a realtor phone and a personal phone. Well, on the 18th, law enforcement searched the area where Ronald's car was found because they've now connected that abandoned car with the report of Ronald missing 2 days earlier. Then 5 days later, Ronald's phone is back on and was tracked heading south near Memphis. And that's where we were left. But now we have an update. Last week, Huntsville police said they tracked down the two women, those two from the liquor store that Ronald was last seen with. And the tracking down of those women then led HPD to supply arrest warrants for 5 people in connection with Ronald's abduction. You heard me correctly. The HPD said the developments revealed through the two women that marks a significant shift in the investigation, and that's their wording, not anyone else's, a significant shift in the investigation, and they have now escalated the case from a missing person case to an active abduction investigation. Well, the police then stated they have filed arrest warrants for 32-year-old Quantarius White, 33-year-old Torrey Lauren McLaren, and I'm going to spell out that name for you, Toure, Torrey Lauren McLaren, and then also 27-year-old Kiera Simone Clark. Okay, those three, the two men and one woman, those three are from Memphis, and the two men, they have been implicated with a potential charge of first-degree kidnapping. All right, so we've got those three. 27-year-old Sabrina Chambers, well, she's from Huntsville. She's also been implicated with a potential charge of first-degree kidnapping. And then finally, our fifth one, that's 33-year-old Carissa Cash of Memphis. She's been suspected of receiving stolen property. They don't really explain that there. I'm guessing she took part, or they believe, I should say, that she took some of Ronald's property. That's just me guessing. Now, with the 5 suspects, HPD is now looking for a total of 6 people. We've got Ronald and the 5 suspected with harming him. HPD says they are jointly searching with the U.S. Marshals Task Force to apprehend these 5 individuals. They then stated that with the assistance of the FBI, they have identified a 450-acre area south of Memphis that extends into northern Mississippi as a potential location for Ronald. All right, I don't know if that is good or bad, if they're still hoping to find Ronald alive. They don't indicate in their wording. Now, a coordinated search effort was conducted on Thursday of last week by 20 investigators. They used drone operators and police search dogs during that search. A $10,000 reward is being offered for information leading to a conclusion in the case, and tips can be phoned in at 256-427-5448. I want to add a side note here. The family representative, his name is Troy Stiles. Well, he told Fox News that they did not receive the information about the potential 5 arrest warrants before the information was given to the media. That's how they learned it, from the media. He did clarify that their independent private investigator that they have hired had tracked down several of those same names during that investigation. Troy Stiles has also said that the family has done, quote, most of the heavy lifting to get federal officials involved and also to get the word out about Ronald's disappearance. Like I said, that's how I heard about it. It was the family that was doing the work, not from HPD. Now, Troy Stiles even stated that they had sent tips to HPD and never received any communication back about if the tips were helpful or if they were even looked into. Now, I'll keep watching this one, and I'm also praying that they find Ronald alive. And to this crazy story out of Pine Lawn, Missouri, that has a family so worried about their neighborhood that they're looking to move. All right, that's nothing new. People unfortunately sell and leave crumbling neighborhoods often, but this one's a little different. The couple, who have yet to be identified publicly, have had a bomb set off in their backyard, a car torched in their driveway, rat poison spread in their grass that they believe was intended to harm their dog, and a voodoo doll has been left on their front steps. And that doll had more rat poison spread around the doll in a circle pattern. Okay, the trouble all seemed to start a couple of months ago. This all happened when the husband of the couple was hit, like assaulted, by a neighbor, a woman who they say might have some mental health challenges. Well, following that altercation, the weird events at their home began. First was the voodoo doll, left on the porch with rat poison scattered around the doll. And later, around that same time, the family dog became ill and the couple rushed the dog to the veterinarian, where it was learned that the dog had ingested rat poison. Then, a few weeks later, in December, surveillance cameras, which I'm guessing were installed following the rat poison / voodoo doll incident, well, those cameras caught a man sneaking around in their backyard. That man places something just off camera, and then it explodes. The device and the explosion blew the door handle off the back door of the house. Then finally, about a week ago, what looks to be the same man was recorded by a security camera lighting something on fire and dropping it on one of the cars in the driveway. One car was a complete loss, and the other car has been damaged. A neighbor told a local affiliate that the couple are leaving because they're terrified that they are going to get hurt. That neighbor said the family is sleeping in shifts until they can, maybe move away. This so they can protect their house and themselves. North County Police say they are looking into the matter. Now, the voodoo doll is creepy, but does this person really understand how the doll works? And maybe this person or persons, they have a second doll and they have the original with them to inflict pain and damage, and the first one was just to warn or maybe harass the couple. I don't know. I've got a thought here, though. Why aren't there reverse voodoo dolls? And hear me out on this one. A voodoo doll that looks like me, that my family can do nice things to, like place a $100 bill in the doll's hands in hopes that one appears in my hand. Or maybe you set the doll in a nice, comfortable place in the morning sun with soft music playing and my favorite cheesecake nearby. Then that morning might happen for me. Okay, I know. This is a good idea, right? Someone needs to turn this into a business idea. Okay, I really hope this family can just get out of here. Leave the area of Pine Lawn and find some peace. And now to the comments from Thursday's episode. Samantha took the words right out of my mouth. She said, "How the hell do you stab yourself 20 times and in the back of your head?" She goes on to explain how frustrated she is with the Ellen Greenberg case. I couldn't agree more. Ellen was supposedly cutting up fruit on that day. She had also been planning a wedding, and she'd been working every day as a school teacher with no obvious lapses in her performance. And then she just stops cutting up the fruit and says, "I think it's time to end this." And she ends it by stabbing herself over a dozen times, including a blow to the base of her skull. And then she pulls the knife back out of that wound and plunges it into her chest. Well, you guys, it's been years that the family has waited for the ruling to be changed. I can't get my hopes up that the fresh eyes at the police department will find out what really happened. And Shelby in the comments said exactly the same thing, that the track record of the authorities leaves us to not believe that Ellen will ever be represented correctly. We'll just have to watch and see. And to so many people that left sweet comments about the show, thank you. Please share the show with a friend so that we can continue doing what we do here at Ono Media. All right, that's your Monday episode of Rise in Crime. Please be part of this experience. Let me know what you want me to cover. In fact, today's first case was a case recommendation by one of the listeners. I had kind of been watching it and just waiting for the trial to end, but I love when you guys alert me to a case. I want to talk about what interests you. We love 5-star reviews and positive comments here at Rise in Crime. Please go ahead and like and follow us on all of our social media accounts and also the YouTube account that we have here at Ono Media. Just a quick reminder, that's Into the Dark, Murder with My Husband, and of course, Rise in Crime. Join me again on Thursday for more morning crime news. I'm Mama Jules, and keep safe out there.